and I might mention it at the end, is that I already had them doing this sort of virtual session, but now that they know how to use Zoom, they're doing so much better. So I'm excited about that. And I think part of it is because they've gotten some practice in the breakout rooms, but that's the only one, because they'd already been with their groups throughout the semester. I've kept this. So
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see if it continues. I don't know. So do you and Lucretia, do you chat via Zoom, or how did you figure?
Our planning. Yeah, we did it by Zoom and by phone, and it took several sessions because we ended up making something called a choice board, and so it just has like 9 activities across different types of learning, and they're going to use that same board for that. We have 5. It's a learning theories class. So we have 5 theorists, and so they use those same 9 activities and pick 3 every time, and they can pick any 3. I mean, as long as they hit, like there's a appetizer, entree, and kind of dessert is how we put it. So there are different types of activities, and they just have to pick 1 of each every time. And so we had to make up all the examples and plan all the assignments and all that stuff together.
That's a lot.
So, but that's it for the rest of the semester for them.
Yeah, I bet the students get a choice, right?
Yeah,
like they can sort of create their own class in that way.
Yeah. But you're right. Up front, it was a lot, but then it was great.
Yeah, once you actually get to seeing them.
Yeah. How about you? How'd you go about making your choices or your decisions?
Well, I am lucky in that my husband he does faculty development for the Alamo colleges, and so I've had him as sort of backup support a lot to ask him for things. And he gave me similar advice that Lucretia did. He's like, you have to think about the end game. What are you trying to get out of this course, especially thinking about the logistics of where they are now, right? In 20 years, if they remember a couple of things, what is it that you want them to remember? And so I sort of reconfigured all of my courses based on that, right? What do I just have to have them do, right? So I worked on that, and I still do Zoom, and then I upload it at the end of each class session, so that way students who can't come, right, can go on. Because I thought about, I was worried about doing either synchronous or asynchronous. And then I sort of had this, Scott, my husband, was like, he's like, if you're doing these synchronous sessions, really students can still be asynchronous if they don't come in, right? You're sort of giving them the option then. And that made me feel a lot better about it, that I didn't actually have to choose one or the other, that students can sort of opt in. And most students that were showing up for the Zoom sessions, are they doing the same for you?
Yeah.
So I didn't reinvent the wheel as much as, I cut some things back, right? And then I've been trying to do a lot of the same material that I was, right, already in class, which is, working and not working. And I'll talk about some of that tonight, right? The large group discussions took me a while to sort of figure out, because I do a lot of that in my regular classes.
Oh, okay. That'll be interesting to hear about.
Well, hi, everybody. How are y'all doing?
Hi.
Decided to dress up. I've got a sport coat on tonight.
I put on a necklace. I hadn't put on a necklace in forever, but I was like, I'm presenting. The necklace will come out. So
well, I've lost 9 pounds since I started working from home. So this sport coat fits again. It's great. I weighed it at 172 yesterday morning.
Wow. Are you writing a lot? Is that why?
Yeah, I'm writing a lot. Probably about 100. I don't know. I try and write every day. I take a long lunch, or I leave at 4:30. I go off and ride for about an hour or so, but it's not that many miles. But I have like a 4.5 mile loop around my neighborhood that I do.
Wow.
So I got a presentation that I'll do, kind of going over that, and then you can talk about best practices and what works for you. I just have a little presentation that talks about how to breakout room, how to So would you prefer that first, or would you prefer that to be second? I think it'd work better first because it kind of gives an idea of what we're looking at. But it's a presentation, so I'm not going to have a lot of it's not going to look like, in some cases, the breakout rooms. It's more like, here's what the buttons are and here's what they do.
That sounds good. You can go first.
Okay.
I'm okay with
By the way, Luella, thank you so much for your email a couple of weeks ago. It really was, I appreciated it, and I passed it on to Kathy. So she's, so we can still screw up and she thinks we're invincible. So.
Oh, no. I always think that. Everyone screws up, so.
Here, just so you know, so I went to your, Kathy, you may know, my husband Scott does something similar as Terry. He has just faculty development colleges. But I went to Terry's session about breakout rooms, and earlier that day, my husband said, "You don't need to go to that session. You won't be able to figure that out." Yes, because I'm so good with technology.
And now you're presenting.
And so then later on, I told him about how I love the breakout rooms, and now he's using the breakout rooms in his classes. So like, I figured this out, and I'm using it no matter what. So here I am.
Yeah, there you go. Just kind of, I got this.
And now you're presenting.
Yeah.
I know.
That's crazy.
Scott is eating crow big time.
Well, he knows my technological lack of savviness, but I'm, trying to learn at all times.
Okay. I hate to interrupt, but I can't get this screen unmuted.
Go to the bottom left. The bottom left of your corner where it says, it has a little video camera.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and then let's see you. There you are.
Where?
There's the Golden Gate Bridge. Right, well, you're over there hovering over on one side of the bridge. I see parts of you. You must have done a virtual background.
I did that the other night when we were doing.
Yeah. Well, kind of get closer. No, put your face closer to your computer a little bit.
That's pretty hard to do. I'm practically in it now.
Are you practically in it? Oh shoot! We can just like.
Well, move back from the screen a little bit.
Oh, maybe move back. Okay.
Or just get rid of the virtual background.
Well, that's what I want to do. How do I do it?
Okay.
It's on part, isn't it?
What?
Yeah, it's right next to your video where it says now stop video. There's a little arrow that goes up.
Oh, yeah.
See your video camera?
The little up arrow next to it, to the right of it, Peggy?
Yep.
To the right of it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just a little arrow.
That's what I clicked on.
Yeah, click it.
And you'll get another menu.
Do what?
When you click on the arrow, you'll get another menu.
Oh, choose virtual background.
Yeah, and pick none.
Yeah, choose none. Let's see.
Not that it wouldn't be better just to look at the background for you.
But we can see you just like over there, like a cell or a amoeba or something.
Yeah,
how do I get to none? Choose a virtual background. I don't want any. How do I do that?
Yeah, so it's hit choose, and then does it say none right there? Black.
How could I have so much trouble? Choose a virtual back. Oh, none. There you are.
Well, that's why we couldn't see you. Your camera's pointing to the screen.
Oh.
It just wasn't the background at all.
There we are.
Now put the background up. No.
I just can't make this thing stay
No.
put.
You're gonna need a little duct tape.
I don't know what I need.
That's everything.
I need help.
Yeah, you're doing fine, Peggy. That
That's
looks good.
But that doesn't explain why we couldn't see you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good
So
enough.
Terry, where's your background?
It's Donegal in Ireland.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now how do I get out of this? Do I just X out?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, just you can just look at all the people because there's nothing else to look at right now.
Well, I'm looking mostly at myself, and I've really had enough of that.
Oh, it's probably speaker view versus
Yeah.
gallery.
Yeah.
Up in the
That's
upper right.
Upper right.
Yeah, you see
Rotate.
a little thing that says, if you mouse over it, says enter full screen. And if you click on it, it'll say gallery view. And you can then see everybody in the gallery instead of the speaker view. So it's a bunch of little boxes. See the little squares?
Speaker view.
Ah, there they are.
Now click on speaker view.
Yep, and it should take you to all boxes. Or vice versa.
Gallery view, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
But it doesn't do it. I'm still stuck looking at myself.
Oh, click it again and see what happens.
I can see you off on the edges, but I'm still in the middle of the screen, great big, or fairly big.
You must have pinned yourself.
What? Oh God, what a mess. How do I?
Oh, no. Well, or do you see everybody up on the top? Everybody else along the top?
No, I see you right on this side, and I see Terry on the other side, and I see some flowers.
Yep.
I like your flowers.
Thank you.
Well, Peggy, in just a minute, we're going to go to Terry's PowerPoint. That might reset it for you just a little bit.
You
Then
think?
Oh, yeah, I do. But you can also, did you go back up to that right corner where it has the little waffle or the tic-tac-toe? Did you hit that up there?
On the right?
At the very top.
Okay. Now I'm pulling myself down, and if I do that, I can get rid of me.
There you go. That works.
I mean, that's good enough. It can hide down there.
Well, it sounds like you're at a pretty good place. So maybe we'll just go ahead and start. Will that work?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Hi, Adela.
Hi, Peggy.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and start and share my screen. And we're going to talk about, Zoom breakout rooms today. By the way, this presentation, Kathy, I saved it to our special file, Zoom file, so we can actually link this to the website if anybody wants to look at it.
Perfect.
So, so I have objectives because Susan's here. If Susan wasn't here, I would.
Scold.
So we're going to talk about defining breakout rooms and features. We're going to talk about how to create one and some of the options that you have. And then I'll go very quickly, but there's a link in this presentation to doing pre-assigned breakout rooms, which means that you'll actually be able to, if you want to, assign people to breakout rooms when you create a scheduled session. So that's something else that you can do. I just threw that in this afternoon. So there are sessions that are split off from the main Zoom meeting that lets users meet in a smaller group for collaboration. The features include you can do up to 50 separate sessions of 200 participants per room. Generally, you'll probably have a much lower amount, maybe 4 or 5 different rooms. You can manually split your participants or automatically. And you as the host can visit and bounce around through every room That way you can kind of check and see how the conversation's going, if the students are still on task, if they've kind of come to some conclusions, and maybe you think, and maybe actually pull everybody out of the rooms and go back to the main session if you like to. So that being able to visit kind of lets you take the temperature of what's going on in the rooms. Now, just like any other session, participants have audio and video and screen sharing ability, so they can do all of the things that you can do in a regular Zoom meeting. It's just that that group has those functions. And if the Zoom meeting is recorded, the main meeting will only record itself. However, the breakout rooms can be recorded separately. So that's a benefit if you wanted to, if somebody would take a recording and record those, that can be done. So a breakout room basically starts out by the host determining how many rooms they want. When you go into the breakout room feature at the bottom of the screen, you have your area where you have share, and one of the other things that you have is the ability to create breakout rooms in that bottom menu. So you would just click on that, and then this menu opens, and it's, you decide how many rooms that you want. It automatically calculates. You see where it says assign 2 participants into 3 rooms. You really can't do that, but it will account the fact that that you can have, say right now we have 9 participants, so it counts those 9 participants and then lets you through this this button either push it up or push it down and choose how many rooms that you want. Now you have a couple of things that you can do. You can assign them automatically. If you click automatically, then it'll automatically just, let's say there's 9 of us in the meeting, it would put 3 of us in a room, and then we, when we get the invitation, it says, do you want to go to the room? You click yes, and you go into the room. Manually, I can decide, you know what, I want to put Samuel and Carmen and Deputy into a room, and I want to put Patsy and Adela and Kathy into a room, and then I can do that manually. So I can just assign those. So that manual assignment looks something like this. Is I have all of my names of all of my people, and I just click, when I click the assign button, those 2 names come up, and then I check them and assign them into the room. If I have, in this case, if our little group here grows, if we have more people that came into our meeting, I could actually add them and bring in extra rooms. Let's say all of a sudden I have 12 people now. So I can create another room by clicking add room, and then do the same thing, click assign, and then just assign anybody that's not assigned to the room. Okay. Now, just to the left of this add room option, add room button, is the options button. And what the options do is allow me to do some different things within the breakout rooms. I can move participants into breakout rooms automatically. I can allow the participants to return to a session by themselves at any time. I can set a time for the breakout rooms to close automatically. By default, the time is, I think, 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes, but you can set it to whatever you like. And then it will also notify me, the host, when the time is up. And the set timer, the recommended, and a clock down clock are all recommended that you actually select these. And the last one here is the countdown. It just is basically, it counts down after they've closed the breakout room that everybody will be into the main room again. And you can start that countdown timer anywhere from 30 minutes, 30 seconds, a minute before the meeting ends to 10 seconds. It just depends. If I think it kind of, if once that countdown timer picks up, and people are still talking, if you're looking at something and they've got 30 seconds, they may spend more time looking at the countdown counter than they would if they had 15 or 10 seconds. And then once you're done, you just go ahead and click, you just click options again, and the options automatically save. So it's just a matter of clicking each of the check boxes and deciding what you need for options. Now, as you see, the notify me when time is up option, which was here, this checkbox here. It just says time is up for a 2-minute breakout room. Do you want to close the breakout rooms now? Then you can just go ahead and close them, or you can keep them open. If say you've got some 10-minute breakout rooms you've been in, everybody's actually having a really great discussion, and you want to keep it open a little bit longer, you can go ahead and just say time is up, but you can keep the rooms open if you like to. Now, these are room options. Now, we also have some host options that you have as the host. Now, these buttons, by the way, all come up, excuse me, as you're going through the process as you're the host. I've gone ahead up here is where when I went into my room options, I created all these breakout rooms. So I come back here, and my host options here show me what is going on with my rooms. So I can join any one of the rooms. I can leave the rooms just by clicking join or leave. If I like to, I can close them. And I can also send a message to everybody and say, okay, you guys are doing great work. You got another minute. And then you can create a chat message that goes to everybody in there. So you have a lot of different options, again, as the host, to be able to control the message, bounce around from room to room. As I said in the introduction, we really want to, you really want to, if you've got breakout rooms, you really want to just pop people into different rooms so that you know that they are part of the room, they're having a great discussion, and they're staying on task. Excuse me. Now, one of the other options that I have is I can also, while I'm in my meeting, is I can actually hit this button down here called recreate, and I can recreate my rooms. So I can say, okay, and one of the things I can do is just switch everybody around and put them into different groups and create brand new rooms. So if I do that, I click recreate rooms, and then I just go through the same process as I did up here to assign people to rooms manually or automatically. Okay, so the pre-assigning. Now, this is a little bit different in that to access the pre-assigned tools, you actually have to go to, you'll go to uiw.edu, you'll go into your Cardinal apps, and you'll sign into Zoom from Cardinal apps. And when you do that, what's going to happen is you've got the, you'll have a button you'll have all your different settings and such. All you need to do is go to the top of the screen on the top right and click the scheduling button. And when you're scheduling, then you'll scroll down a little bit. You put in, when you're scheduling your meeting, you'll do things like set the time, give it a name, how long the meeting is going to be, things like that. And then once you set all those settings, you'll scroll down to meeting options. And then you can just click this breakout room pre-assign. So I'm not sure, I'm sure that Luella or Dipti can kind of shed some light on this, but if you're using groups, you can actually put your students into groups, pre-assigning them so that when they come into the discussion, you can just push them into a discussion group and they're in their room. When you check this checkbox, two buttons light up. One that says create rooms and one that says import. So to create a room, you just click on that. it gives you a little, you get a big menu up here. You click the plus sign for rooms, and it'll add multiple rooms. It's interesting in that if you cancel this and then you come back, let's say you click rooms 1, 2, and 3, and you cancel it and come back, and you try to create 3 more rooms, it will be rooms 4, 5, and 6. I don't know why it does that. But you click the plus sign to add rooms. Then it gives you the room name. You click on that. It'll give you a window where you can add names to it. And then you just type in, for example, I wanted to add John Miller. I just type John. And once that happened, I click on John Miller's name, and then he's in the room. And I just continue to do that with all of my students until I filled up the rooms that I want to use, and then you'll click Save. The other option is to import from a CSV file. And this is a little easier in that basically you just take an Excel spreadsheet, you put the column A header as pre-assigned room name, the column B header as the email address, type in the room name, and then type in the email address of the student. That's really simple. And then once you've saved that CSV file, you just click import, import it, it saves, and all the rooms are created for you. Couple of things about the meeting is, if you're going to start the meeting with participants pre-assigned to breakout rooms, I do note that if a participant joins before the host, they will automatically assign to the breakout room you specified. If the participant joins after the host, they will not be automatically assigned the room you specified when scheduling meetings. So again, they need to come in before you do. There's a link on this presentation about breakout rooms. If you just go to zoom.us, they've got some fantastic tutorials that are on video, as well as step-by-step instructions, and they can give you some really great information on creating rooms. So that's pretty much a kind of a a 15-minute rundown on how to do rooms. So I am going to turn this over. I'm going to stop my share, and I'll turn this over to Wella and to Dipti, and they will. I'm going to just be quiet and listen. So you guys ready? Go ahead.
Luella, why don't you go ahead first?
Oh, I was about to say the same thing to you, Dipti, but I am ready to go first. Hold on. I'm going to share my screen. I saw that Terry had his, oh, maybe I'm not. It says I can't share my screen. Can I share my screen?
Hold on. I hate this feature because I always forget to to set it up so everybody can. I don't let people share their screens very well.
Okay. All right, so we can see this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Great. All right, so it took me way too long to. That's how you know I'm not good at technology, when it takes me like a few minutes to start the PowerPoint. All right, so I use breakout rooms in a couple of ways. As Terry mentioned, I like doing them at the beginning of class. I think it's really helpful. I don't assign them, I don't assign students to the breakout rooms prior to class, mainly because I've been worried, and I'll be interested to hear what the rest of you think, and you might know more sort of technology-wise about this, Terry. But I've been worried with Zoom sessions, knowing if students are going to show up or not, because I originally planned on sort of having that all pre-set up, and then I was worried about, are they going to be able to verify I pre-assign it? So I don't, but come into class, I automatically put students in breakout rooms. And I sort of have this as, I call it sort of the same as the beginning of class chatter that happens, right? You walk into a room, students connect for a little bit. I've noticed that on the sort of the main board when students come in, they don't seem to talk as much to each other. And so by putting them in small rooms, and usually I'll give them some sort of question like, hey, how are things going with the pandemic? How are you adjusting? How is my class going? How are the rest of your classes going? This is a time to complain about me, your other professors, whatever it is. It's, I'm not going to come visit these rooms, right? This is a time just to sort of debrief and unload about how the semester is going. So that way, as they sort of get into class, they remember that they know everyone on the screen, right? It's not as if they've just come here and suddenly they have no idea who it is, right? They sort of build that sense of community right at the beginning. And then after that, I bring them out and I always ask them, I always broadcast a message at the end of the session that says, hey, is there anything that you want to make sure that you, any questions that you have for me before we start class, right? Be sure to ask, you know, each other this, right? So that way when they do come back, and usually the students will sort of trickle in because I have a 60-second, because some of my students are chatty like me, right? So as they trickle in, they can sort of have these questions ready and they'll be thinking about it. I just think it's sort of a nice way for them to sort of get all of the, I think, anxiety from everything else in their lives out without me suddenly, without them coming to class. And I'm like, okay, now let's talk about content right away. I just think it's nice for them to have just that few little 5 minutes together. As I said, I found it difficult at the beginning to have students talk holistically about any subject matter. So I think a lot of like the best teaching lessons come from sort of times when you failed. So originally when I started Zooming the sessions, I just would be like, all right, well, let's have a big group discussion about something. And that didn't work. Students were silent. And I'd spent a long time throughout the semester trying to make students not be silent when I would ask them a question. So I learned that breakout rooms are sort of the only way that I could get students to talk to each other first, and then miraculously they would talk in large group discussions. So you'll see I have on the side here, right, that's sort of to aid in large group discussions, right? It gets students comfortable with the subject, right? Allows them also to ping ideas off of each other first. Sometimes, right, if you just put something on a screen and you ask everyone what they think, no one wants to say it first. And I think going to the breakout room makes them have that opportunity to say, well, maybe I think this, and test it on each other before getting back into that big group. And I think you're right, sort of at the top of our session, right, there's that big record thing on there. It just feels different being, I think, in this environment than it does in the classroom. So I think the breakout rooms are helpful in that manner, right? I have here that it allows them to process what was asked, right? They can actually try to figure out, well, what exactly is she asking by that question, and sort of think about the questions, especially for the more theoretical discussions that we have. I think sometimes you just sort of need that space to sort of talk amongst each other. One thing too, I think students can often, it's easier for them to say, when I was in my breakout room, right, a group member said this, or I said this to someone else, and now I'm in here and saying it again. And you know, that person agreed with me in there, and somehow, right, I'm already validated as I'm coming back to this large group discussion and you know, trying to see if this idea made sense. So I think that way the breakout rooms are helpful. What I do at the beginning before I put them in the breakout rooms, if I'm having them talk about some sort of theoretical concept, is I show them a slide with like the points that I want them to discuss, and I have them write down what they most want to discuss together. So I might have them, you know, oh, hold on just a minute. Sorry, my kids are watching a TV show upstairs, and my daughter just came down, so I'm sorry. You can have a granola bar, sweetie pie, and you got to go right back up. Sorry, my husband's teaching at the same time, so we had to coordinate this tonight, so it was movie time.
I want a granola bar. Wait a minute. Well, you're giving away food, hey.
All right, so All right, now Sue. So, all right. So, so at the beginning, right, I put up the slide like this, and I have them actually write down, and I look at them, and I tell them that I'm looking at them, or I tell them they can like snap a picture with their phone, because they'll forget once they're in the breakout room, and you can only broadcast right so much language. So write down the main topics of conversation. I also merge my objectives with theirs. I can be kind of pointed with the things that I want to make sure that they understand. I make sure that I put that on the discussion board, and then or on the lecture slide. And then I always pull things that they've said from the discussion boards about a particular subject, right? Because what I've done is I have discussion boards on the weekends, and then we have our class meetings right during the regular week. So I pull things from that, and I'll have that on the slide along with the things that I want them to get that I sort of already know. And that way they sort of feel as if the class is size, right? What we're doing in the main group session and what they're talking about in the breakout rooms all sort of go together. And I always will put that on the main slide where I'll say, right, I'll sort of have the main points, then I'll say, so-and-so said this, right? You might use this to move forward as you discuss. And I try to merge them as much as possible, right? If someone is sort of making my point for me that I'm hoping they'll get, I'll be like, well, Julia said this, and this is what I was hoping you would get. So perhaps, right, think about this. So I've used this with sort of the heavier concepts that we've had in class that are sort of broad. So I have here, right, they used with, we did Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which really deal with difficult subject matter. These were in 2 of my classes. So like suicide, mental illness, cultural differences, right? If I just sort of said, right at the beginning of class, hey, right, we're in a big group discussion, I want you to talk about these issues, the students just look like a deer in the headlights, right? They get very nervous. But I think having the sort of time outside in the breakout rooms where they can sort of figure out, well, is it sort of okay that I'm saying this, right? They can come back to the larger group discussions and feel more comfortable. As Terry mentioned, I think it's really important to visit the groups while they're chatting so they know that they're not just by themselves. So sort of dropping in and saying, hey, how are things going? I liken this, right, to sort of walk in the room as students are discussing, and I make sure that I visit every single room. Even if it's just for a few minutes, I'll make sure that I'm going in so they know that they're expected to actually be on topic. This may not be the right way to do it, Terry, but what I have them do is if they want to contact during the session, if they want me to come, I tell them just to text or email me, and I hear the ding, and then I'll go visit that room. That may not be the best way. I'm sure there's a better Zoomy way, but that's what I've been doing so far. So sometimes if they have a difficult question, I can go in there. I do use the broadcast features as I would in class. So sometimes, right, I'll tell them, right, I want you to talk for 5 minutes on this and 5 minutes on that, or I'll go and I'll be visiting different rooms and I'll see that some of the groups have moved on to one part of the discussion, some of them haven't. So I'll use that broadcast feature to say, hey, right, if you haven't, I want to make sure that you talk about this before we go back in the next few minutes. So I use that quite a bit. And as I'm visiting the rooms, I write down the key points that the groups are making, like things that I think are really smart. So that way, when we go back in a large group discussion, I can say, well, so-and-so said this in the breakout room. Again, right, just to sort of make sure that they're feeling heard and they feel as if they're part of the class. When we reconvene as a group, I actually schedule out stretch breaks and regular breaks in the Zoom session. So usually after they've done breakout rooms, if we've discussed some theory, I've put them in breakout rooms, I actually give them a 5-minute break.
Do you think this is one of her scheduled breaks?
Luella?
She means business when she breaks.
They just also magically disappear.
That's amazing. Our name's up there.
Yeah, I think it's just her audio. So we just texted her quick or chat just to see.
Oh, she's out of the meeting, so.
She's out. Maybe she's going to come back in. But so, I mean, really such great ideas there.
Yeah.
So
I was really taken by the idea of having them write down the things they want to discuss in the big discussion. That seemed like a clever idea. So what would she do with that picture that they take of what they've written down? Would she put it, can you send it through with the chat, or is she having them text it to her? Or what is happening?
Did they take a picture?
One of the things she said was, say, make a list of things you want to talk about when we get back together in the big group. And then she said, and they take a picture of it on their phone. And then I'm wondering.
Okay.
I got the feeling that she was referring to, that when you're in those rooms, you have access to that discussion. And then when you get out of the rooms, you don't have access to those people and whatever conversation was happening there.
Right, yeah.
And that way you bring it with you, you have your notes. So
okay.
It's kind of also like if you're using small group discussion in your classrooms, it's a way of, some sort of accountability for the conversation that's going on, not just listening, you're actively listening and keeping track of what's happening in that conversation and bringing it back, So.
Oh yeah, that makes, actually my question was just like a real low level logistics question. How do you move these pictures around?
I think the other thing I'm thinking about, if you have them turn that in, like what notes are you taking, have it turned in, that's, just what were you doing while you were in there kind of a question.
Yeah, sure.
So logistics. So.
Deep, do you want to start?
I can jump in, or
might be a good idea.
Yeah,
okay.
I would assume that phone call that Kathy just got is hopefully is Luella, or I need a.
That's what I'm thinking. Should we just wait for a moment till she comes back, till Kathy comes back, or?
Yeah, let's give it another minute. One of the things I did want to say is that I would assume that one of the things they can do is just hold their phone up to the camera too, to say, here's what we discussed, here's our big points.
Yeah.
So, or they can, when they come out of the room, they can always chat them. That's one of the nice features of chat. So there's another couple of options.
Yeah. So can I ask you, while we're talking about chat and breakout rooms, one of the questions I had was that, or actually it's about screen share, but so like we were sharing the screen, and then if you wanted to send a chat, do you have to get out of screen share to be able to share the chat, to send a chat?
No, you just open up before you share, or even while you're sharing your screen, there's a chat window that you can click. When you're sharing your screen, under the more, the little three ellipses, more, click that, and then you can click that and you'll see the chat window. But you can always open that up right at the beginning of your meeting. And I've gotten in the habit of doing that, is I bounce that
open
out.
Chat from the get.
Yeah, I pop those out, and then since I have two screens on my computer, I just pop those out and move them over to the other side where I don't have a screen like I am right now.
Yeah.
Makes it
one thing I found that was interesting about this idea of whether you pre-assign or don't assign, since this kind of reiterates something that Luella was saying, I'll just go ahead and talk about that a little bit now.
Okay.
I was going to talk about that too. Is I also started off thinking that I was going to pre-assign my students, and then as soon as I thought, start making my list, I was like, oh, I don't know who's going to come, because I've not, in this scenario that we're in, I'm not holding the online meetings as an attendance grade or anything like that. I understand that many of my students are having issues being able to get online in a synchronous way. So in general, my class is asynchronous, but I have weekly check-ins. I call them weekly check-ins, but I have weekly meetings for all my classes. They do not last the entire length of the class. But we definitely have some conversation and some teaching and things going on. But because of the way that format is, I realize that I'm not sure who's going to show up, and not just, mostly they do, but you never know. And as a result, what I did that I found very helpful was I just made my lists of how I would ideally like to group them. So I just have my paper list sitting next to me. And so when they first come in, we just kind of are all together, like in this gallery view situation. And then I will switch over to, I'll just assign them. And I tell them, I said, here's a breakout room. We're going to the breakout rooms, and I'll assign them as they go. And depending on the purpose, I'll change up what the grouping is. And I found that to be really nice, because that way, you know, you're not stuck with these imbalanced rooms. Sometimes 3 people from the same group don't show up, and that was your 3 people who were absent that day, you know. And so you have one group with 2 people in it, and then the other one has 5. So, oh, she's coming back. So I found that was helpful to not pre-assign people for that reason. I'm going to pause if Luella wants to jump back in and finish her presentation.
Oh no, have you started, DT? I don't know what happened.
No, I was just kind of bouncing off of your idea about pre-assign, or whether or not to pre-assign students. So
okay, I'm sorry about that.
No, go for it.
Like the very first time I taught, I got dropped, right, in one of my classes, and then this time, of course, I think it's just bound to happen, right? Bad beginner's luck.
That's really hilarious, that you were talking about taking a break and then you took one.
And you meant it.
Break me anyway, right? That's what happens. And I know my students do too, right? So that's why I do the break, right? I put the slides back up, right? And then I sort of go through. Right, just remember, right, this is what we talked about before you went into the breakout rooms. You know, I give them the stretch break. Okay, so sorry about that. Hold on, so the next thing. When we reconvene as a group, I usually mute myself. And one thing that I try to do in class, and what I've noticed happens even more online, is students have a tendency not to talk to each other, right? So I'll ask them a big question and they will just basically talk to me, right? They'll expecting me. I call it sort of the pinging, right? We call it a discussion, but it's really like one student asking me a question, right? Then I answer, and then another student asks me a question. So they just ping all the things back to me. So I tell them, like, this is just going to happen in class. This is the same thing that I do in class, which is I sort of mute myself. And so I mute literally on Zoom, right? Usually in class, I'm like, I'm just not going to talk, and it's going to get uncomfortable. And it does, right, for a little bit, until they actually learn they have to talk and build up a discussion. So, right, I actually mute myself, tell them that's going to happen. I know they've already done the work, so I know that they can talk about this. The only time when I'll unmute myself, and it's sort of, I tell them this from the beginning, right, is if you have a factual question you want me to answer, or if 2 students have said something, and this is usually my science majors who get really nervous, and sort of my literature classes, they'll be like, I just need to know what the professor thinks about this. It seems as if both ideas are being validated, right? Like, if you just have to know what I think, right, I'll unmute myself and let you know what I think. You can ask me direct questions in that way. But I've noticed that as students are discussing, which didn't happen before I started using the breakout rooms, their cameras, they automatically turn off, right? They put themselves or they automatically turn on. Whereas before you would just see a bunch of black boxes, right? They began to actually talk to each other, and it just, like, throughout the 15 to 20 discussion, the cameras appear, right? You can suddenly see them, and they seem engaged, and they actually talk to each other. So I think that that's a really special thing that the breakout sessions have done. And through this really quickly, because I want to make sure to give deep tea time. But one thing that I had mentioned to Susan that I do is I've been using it not just for bigger theoretical discussions, but also for something really specific. So you might be thinking of ways to sort of connect this to your classes. When I teach my world literature classes, my goal, we all teach Shakespeare and world literature. And my goal for the students is always to have them know that in 10 to 20 or 30 years, right, they can pick up Shakespeare and they can refigure it out. Then maybe, right, in 6 months from now, they might not be able to get it right, just as they don't get it right away, but they know that they can figure it out. So I usually just actually have them translate Shakespeare into modern English. So we try a big activity together where we do this. So I have them literally, and I watch their little screens, right, where they write down what they think Shakespeare is saying. Then I have them read the old, the early modern English, the regular Shakespeare, and then I have them read their translated versions. And I'll just pick out two, right, camera screens. I'll pick out two students and say, you were reading it in the old version, you were reading it in the sort of what you have translated. And I remind them that they're all going to be equally bad at the translations, that it's just sort of working it out. And then after we do this once together, I put them in small groups where they do this and they mimic the exact same thing that we did, right? I give them another passage. And I usually try to do this with just groups of 2 to 3. So as they're translating, they are sort of forced to talk just to one other person about it, rather than even having, I think, the anonymity that can come with like a 4 or 5 person group. Because I think when you are stuck with one other person, right, you sort of feel the responsibility that I need to actually figure this out. So before they get into their smaller breakout rooms, I actually, again, I have them translate it by themselves together, sort of together. So I'm watching them translate. I have them just tell me when they're done. So I'm like in the chat box, just say, I'm done. And then when I notice that most of them are done, I'll just go ahead and put them in the breakout room, and I'll have them read the old Shakespeare and then read it in the modern version, and then we reconvene and we do that again. So we just redo it together, and then we talk about places where it might have gotten mixed up. I do this I've done this for 2 to 3 sessions, 3 sessions total, where we sort of worked on theory. And each time that they translate, I then have them talk about, right, well, what's going on in the scene, right? So we have a little bit of discussion mixed. And I also visit each room as this is going on, again, right, just to make sure that they're actually doing it. And I've been sort of pleasant that when I go and visit the rooms, the students are actually reading it aloud and trying to sort of understand what's going on. Last, I actually wrapped up this unit last class session, and I pulled students at the end to see, well, do you feel as if, right, if we have this on the exam, because my goal is to on their exam, they're going to translate, right, some Shakespeare, so I know if they understand what's being said. So I did a little poll at the end to see who needs more help, right, did this work right. I had all in teaching 2 sections of that class, and all but 2 people said that they feel as if they're pretty confident, and I gave those other 2 people of exercises to sort of work on with me sort of one-on-one afterwards. So I think that sort of making a version of this, right, might be helpful, right? You might things that are sort of really hard conceptually, and then having students work in pairs can help. I sort of recognized the value of this because of what students have told me afterwards, sort of breakout rooms in general. They said that they feel as if they can work well together, that they feel as if they're part of a social community. They also feel less pressure than when they're sort of in a large classroom in Zoom, but students said they actually like this better, that they actually feel as if they're more interaction than a regular class because they feel as if they have to talk to each other. I guess in my regular classes, sometimes they can look out the window or listen to other people, but they said as if, right, it's just silent when you're breakout room, right? And you are there just to talk about this particular subject. And they feel as if they get more out of it because there aren't any distractions. And of course, a lot of them have talked about, especially during the right, that they really appreciate socializing with other classmates. I have one other thing that I'll talk about if we have time, but I'm going to switch it over to DP now, especially because I got dropped out for a while. So I'll stop sharing my screen. If we have time, I'll tell you about the cool Easter egg thing I found in my class.
That sounds really interesting, Luella. So we have till 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll leave time at the end for sure. So I think a lot of the kind of general points that I was going to talk about, fortunately, Luella's kind of started us down that road already. So I'll just fill in some other ideas I had. And so my name, I've met many of you. My name is Deepthi Karod, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Education. And the class that I'm going to talk about where I use this is called Learning Theories. And it's about theories of learning and development. But I've used it in 2 of my classes, which are both about 18 people. And so here I just wrote down some notes to kind of follow along. Let me see if I can get this scooted over. All right. I'm a lot like Luella on this one. I'm just like, we just go with it. I don't worry, honestly, about taking care of my notes on the side. All right. So it started off with, what was the need for breakout rooms? I mean, honestly, so the first week I taught online, I didn't use breakout rooms. I was using Zoom to check in with everybody. And it just didn't feel right. And I started thinking something's not right. And I started, of course, the students were feeling, I could tell because I was checking with them, they were feeling disconnected from each other and from UIW, and there was that. And so I thought, okay, well, I taught them how to use gallery view so they could all see each other, and I thought that was going to take care of it. But what I started realizing was the fact is I don't teach like that sage on the stage method, right? Where I'm talking, and typically when I'm in the classroom, there's so much group work or peer learning going on where they're sharing with each other. And in Zoom, I found I was controlling all the talk, kind of what Luella was talking about with the pinging in that way, but it was even worse because a lot of times it was the ultimate whole group teaching, which we all know doesn't really fare very well in terms of, generating lots of student conversation or voice and sharing. And so I realized that that's what I was uncomfortable with. And that's where I felt like that there's like this stagnation happening in my classroom. And that's why I decided, I had also gone to Terry's breakout room session on those 2 days back that we had of training. And so I thought, okay, I'll try this out. It can't be that bad. And so what I did was I decided to, like I said, I made a list on paper of my students, and my initial use of this room in this learning theories classroom was, there were 2 things. One is I just wanted them to be able to check in with each other. And like Luella was describing, that kind of classroom chatter, I realized that they weren't just missing looking at each other, or seeing me, much as, we like to think it was really me they were missing, but they missed seeing their friends. And every time, if they were seeing their friends in class, there was a professor in the middle of that. They weren't really getting to see their friends, And so I decided I'd put them in groups by how they sat in the classroom, like in the classes I teach, I try to group them rather than having rows. We actually move all the furniture around when we can do that. And so I literally just had them in groups by the friends they sit with. And so we went to that. And so I talk about that a little bit here. So first I made my list. I manually assigned them. And the benefit of that was that if someone's absent, I could just, make the decision on the fly there and then go ahead and assign them that way. But I used it for just checking in, emotional, social emotional kind of wellness, what's going on, those things. I didn't want to ask every week, like, how's it going? So I come up with different questions. So last week, like we were talking about, okay, what's a new food? Some different food you've eaten this week that you don't get to usually eat when you're at home, at UIW, right? So things like that, it just gets them kind of going. And at the beginning, the first time, I just popped in at the start to check in and then said, I'm not going to pop in for the next 10 minutes and go talk, But I did warn them. I said, anytime you're on the internet, don't think that what you're saying is private. So it's your time to talk with each other, but you never know what anybody can overhear at any point. So I said, don't be talking about other professors or, say anything very private. I thought it's a good thing for them to be aware of, So we did that, and I found some of the same things that Luella found, is that, you know, some of the impacts this had is when we'd come back to the group, I found that more cameras and microphones were on. There were more smiles, there was more sharing in the general discussion. One of the things I realized that I had not expected at all is, for instance, there were one or two of my students who hadn't had their cameras on in the whole group session, but with their friends, they had them on. Like, so one had a lot of acne. She never has acne I've never seen her with acne, but I realized, you know, I've been reading about a lot of cases of adult acne, for instance, popping up because of the stress and anxiety. So I could, you know, she had her camera on in her small group, but she didn't want to have it on in the large group. And I realized that sometimes there are things like that that we may be able to pick up on as well, that we wouldn't realize if we didn't have these small groups, you know. And some of the ideas I ended up using them for, aside from checking in, is I'd send them questions to transition back. So as we were coming back, I would say, okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is this. And I use that little broadcast feature as well. Just said, you know, last 2 minutes, let's talk about this, and bring your notes back with us. And we also did, and it worked really well for this, we did a peer editing. So they have a teaching philosophy statement that they have to write, and they were supposed to bring their drafts, and for that I reassigned the groups differently, and that way they could work with their classmates to get some feedback for the writing. And that I wasn't sure how that was going to go, but that worked out pretty well too. So that's kind of my short notes. I definitely want to say that I think when I asked them why that felt different than our whole group, even if it was a pretty small class, 17, 18 kids, but they all enjoyed the opportunity to talk to just their friends. And if we think about that in our classroom, there are those students who are never, and you know, they just don't want to really speak up in front of the whole class, but they'll be very engaged in their small group of 4 or 5 people. And I just needed to recreate that atmosphere online that I provide for them in the classroom. And I just didn't realize I hadn't done that before without the breakout rooms. And so that worked out really well for them. And then there's the whole question of, you know, why even use small groups, and which I think Luella was getting at a lot of those points. And, you know, it's for language learning. Whenever you're learning new vocabulary, it's very powerful to be able to rehearse these things, practice using these words sometimes that you're not sure of how to pronounce or how to use them in a sentence correctly. To be able to do that with your peers in a less threatening environment, you know, because those are your friends or just 2 or 3 of people. It really is empowering and confidence building for a lot of students. And then they're willing, or I might hear Kathy use a word that I've heard, but I'm not really comfortable using yet. And now I might be able to turn around and use that in a different discussion group because I've heard her use it. And I know she's smart and she got that word, right? So those sorts of things for language learning, for people who are second language learners, sometimes that is even more important to be able to do that. And also for concept attainment, because you can practice thinking about ideas and mess up and not understand what something means, or say, you know, yeah, she kept talking about that thing about constructivism, but I really don't get it. I don't understand the difference between Vygotsky and Piaget, and I don't see the big deal. And when 2 or 3 of them say that, then they feel more comfortable bringing that question back out to you in the whole group, like you were saying, Luella. So I think that small group learning is so powerful. I know that I do it in the classroom. I just was excited to be able to find a way to do it online. So I'll pause there. Yeah.
Got a question. So you talked about doing peer editing in the breakout room. Tell me how that worked out. What'd you do, literally?
That was my question too, Susan, so I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, so I had asked them to bring a draft of their draft was due the night before, just to make sure they had something. And, you know, I sent them, so I did send them a reminder like 2 days out by email. And then I used this app called Remind, which is so you can text each other without having to actually exchange phone numbers, because everybody gives them to the Remind app and then a text. So I sent them an announcement out the day before, again, like, remember to bring your online draft. And then, and some people had them in bullets, some people had actual, you know, written out drafts. And so when I put them in their small groups, I said, you can read them to each other, depending on where you are, you can share them with each other. So I had, when in some of the groups I popped in, they were screen sharing and walking through those things. Some people chose to read them. Some people had only brought bullets, and I encouraged them to at least have transition sentences, like a opening sentence of each paragraph and a transition sentence, so that they could, and then they could have bullets in between if that's where they were, you know. And I think
So
that
how did the other students give their feedback? Did they just say, oh, I really like this, or?
Sure. So they I encouraged them to ask questions, to think about, in this case, I asked them to think about, you know, organization. Like, was everything in that paragraph actually about whatever that paragraph was about? I encouraged them to, you know, I'd given them a list ahead of time of the types of things that belong in a teaching philosophy statement. And so I encouraged them to get feedback about, does this belong here? Or, you know, are you using a positive tone as opposed to like, oh, I saw this horrible teacher and I'm never going to do that in my class, you know, which sometimes happens. So different types of feedback depending on what it was. There were very few of them who at that point were really ready for grammatical feedback. They weren't really that polished yet. So I didn't dwell on that, but it was more these sorts of structure.
So they, you know, it was big picture, organizational, and they had a little list or something to refer to, some ideas of what they were looking at.
And the other nice thing is when you hear someone else's, of course, then you get ideas about what else you could include in yours, right, that you didn't think about. And I had also talked to them about using specific examples instead of generalities, and to tell their story of like what teaching would look like in their classroom or things like that. And so that way they could hear that or ask that of each other and say, so what example would you use, you know, things like that. And the other nice thing is that came out of that is that some of them had big questions, you know, like, can we, when we turn, because after that, their next step is that they have to send those to me and they will get my feedback, and then they're going to submit a final draft. So they could have those questions for the next step too. Yeah. So that's about it.
All right.
Yeah. So Luella, did you want to share your podcast idea?
Yes, so I'll say it quickly. So at the beginning of the semester, I'd already set up this sort of podcast assignment where students had to choose 3 of the books that we were reading and talk about, this in my children's lit class, about how would a child respond to reading this book versus an adult, what sorts of concerns, and they have a prompt, and they have to talk for 10 to 15 minutes. And the students began doing so much better on this assignment because I had them choose, you know, anytime throughout the semester, you do it 3 times. So I've already listened to a lot of them, but after they started using the breakout rooms class, they really got comfortable with Zoom, and I hadn't had any of them, even though I told them, right, try Zoom, right? They'd all been using basically their phones, right, and uploading it. But the discussions would go on for 30 minutes sometimes, right? They're much longer, they're much more in depth, they're very excited. So it's a really nice way, I think, for them to sort of, like, they've become more adapted to the technology, and you can tell that they're thinking via this method, right, is getting better and better. So I plan on using it in the future, right? I'm going to try to assign this, right, and make them actually do the breakout rooms with me we're in a regular class, right? So that way they know the technology rather than me saying, you can try this, right? Because once they've tried it, right, they're really good at it. I was so excited as I was listening to a lot of their podcasts, right, as them discussing the book sort of one-on-one.
So.
Well, I mean, thank you, Terry. Do you want to sing us off? But Luella and Deep, thank you so much for just sharing really the way you're using it in your course. We definitely have to get this videotaped or recorded and put on on our website. So it's just so many great ideas. So thank you for sharing and being so willing. So, and having great things to share.
I think Luella ought to do a piece just on the whole podcast thing. That is a really neat way to, another way to kind of, I mean, that's good whether or not we're quarantined or not. So thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
No, I just wanted to say, you know, I think what we've heard throughout the past couple of weeks is a lot of people who are looking for this very thing, like ways for students to participate. And that seems to be an issue that people were running up against. And what you showed us here were just kind of the benefits of the breakout room and participation, and then really all the consequences and the positive things that happen because of it. It's kind of, I think it's kind of inspired me. So thank you.
And I think that some of the really, really kind of nitty-gritty specific ideas that you both had, easier for me to translate to another discipline. You know, I was thinking, okay, well, Shakespeare. Oh, but I could translate, you know, a math equation into words. I could translate a set of data into, you know, so that almost specificity, I think, is in a certain way kind of universal. You know, lets me think in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, I think you could do it with any sort of difficult theory, right? So I can imagine, right, any sort of really dense paragraph that you don't get, right? You could go and try this, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe even do it, you know, paragraph by paragraph or something, or sentence by sentence, depending on the theorist, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much for coming, everyone, tonight. Appreciate it so much.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you all for your time tonight.
Thank
And thank you
you.
for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. Kathy, anything else you want to add before I hit the magic red button?
Well, tomorrow night it's polls. We have Poker and Jonathan Lovejoy and how they use polls in online instruction.
Oh, fantastic.
Also for participation, yeah.
Nice team, Kathy.
What's that?
Nice teams for us, Kathy.
Yeah.
Well, please come back tomorrow night. We should, you know, what we ought to do is, you know, I'm just really getting such a big kick out of all the people that are coming to these sessions. Kathy, did you send, if you haven't, the survey that Kathy sent out last week, if you haven't filled it out, are you still accepting those surveys, Kathy?
Oh, it did close. We had a lot of good participation. So
yeah, we had like over 200 people.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so that was wonderful. Thank you for taking time.
Where was it?
Have a great evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Leave meeting.